All right. Hello and welcome back to Real Seekers. I'm your host, Dale, the Real Seeker. And today I am bringing you guys another special treat. The past couple weeks have been a great week at Real Seekers here. And we're bringing you a debate on the topic of the existence of God. And I'm joined by, in the first place, my co-host, Omar Fakhoury. Hey, Omar, how are you?
Doing good.
Welcome back to the show there. I know it's been a while since you were last on the show there, but yeah, it's great to have you back backing me up. And we have two debaters. So in the first place, representing the atheist side, we have Juan from Modern Atheism. Hey Juan,
Hi,
how are you?
hi, good on you.
I'm good. I'm good. It's great. This is your first time on Real Seekers. I was a guest on your show a couple
That's
weeks
right.
ago, and that went good on the resurrection. But yeah, if just before we go to the Christian guest, do you want to just take a couple minutes to briefly introduce the audience as to who you are, since it's your first time on the show?
Yeah, sure. My name is Juan. I'm 34, and I have a YouTube channel on atheism. I'm agnostic actually, but I have a YouTube channel on atheism and skepticism. So if you want, just go check it out.
Excellent. All right, cool. And filling in for the Christian side, arguing for the pro side is Phil Bair, who's no stranger to the show. You've been on dozens, at least a dozen times, I would say at this point. So yeah, how's everything on your end, Phil?
Well, things are chaotic.
Yeah, yeah. No,
This is moving week for my wife and me. We're moving out of a 17-acre ranch up in the mountains near Evergreen, Colorado, and we're moving down the hill and downsizing dramatically, and we're trying to find homes or at least temporary homes for four horses, and this is absolutely a chaotic and unsettling week for us, and so you're catching me at a time of unbelievable stress right now. But other than that, I feel blessed, and things. Whenever something like this occurs, I always just think to myself, it could be a whole lot worse. So,
yeah,
so
yeah.
I'm
Sorry. Yeah, that's a great outlook. And again, as a fellow brother in Christ, we know that again, everything is in God's providence and everything happens for good for those who love him. So at least we have that and stuff like that. So yeah, with that said, I think we will get straight into today's debate. And I forget who did we agree is going to start with their first opening presentation? Is it going to be Phil for theism or yeah? Okay. So we're going to go to Phil, and I'll give you, again, it's a loose time frame, but 10 minutes or less, or 10 minutes or thereabouts, to kind of present arguments in favor that yes, God exists.
okay. Well, I'll go ahead then. But before I present my case, I want to concede this debate right now before it even begins. And I want to declare Juan the winner of the debate right now. And it's not because I lack arguments, but it's because winning a debate is not my ultimate goal. If I'm focused on victory, then I will be distracted from what truly matters, and that's the pursuit of truth for me. So I'm not here to collect rhetorical points or to impress an audience with clever turns of phrase or anything like that. I'm here because the question of God's existence is really the most important question a human being can face, and it deserves honesty and clarity, and it deserves rigorous reasoning. And if this exchange brings us even one step closer to truth, then it's going to be worthwhile for me. So I don't want to be distracted with some kind of desire to win. I just want to pursue truth together, and I want to pursue greater understanding. And another purpose of a debate for me is for me to learn. And if I am distracted with the desire to win, then I feel like I'm not going to learn. I probably might not learn as much as I want to. I want to learn from whatever Juan has to say, and I want to listen, and I want to respect what Juan has to say. And so I just want to get rid of all distractions, and I want to just pursue truth. So, but as far as my presentation is concerned, I would say we are here, obviously, to consider whether God exists, and I will defend the claim that he does by presenting three deductive arguments. And well, I'll present all these all at once, but we can take them one at a time as we go along. So I'm going to defend the claim that he does, and these are not a probability. These aren't appeals to probability or sentiment. They're formal arguments. And that means that if the premises are true, and I think I can show that they are, then the conclusions follow with necessity, and that is that God exists. So the three arguments are as follows. And I'm going to summarize them real quickly before I go into each one. The first argument is that the reality of evil requires the existence of God. And I have come to this conclusion through a long years of study of the problem of evil. And instead of the problem of evil proving that the God does not exist, the problem of evil, in my view, actually proves that he does exist. Second one is that the uniqueness of human personhood requires the existence of God. The third one is that the possibility of rational knowledge requires the existence of God. So I'll go through the first one first. Argument one, the moral argument from evil. And the argument from my side is, if God does not exist, then objective evil does not exist. Second premise, objective evil does exist, and the conclusion is, therefore, God exists. So the defense of premise one is, if God does not exist, reality reduces to matter and natural law. But natural law describes what happens. It does not prescribe what ought to happen. Let me repeat that. Natural law describes what happens, but it does not prescribe what ought to happen. Physics can explain molecular behavior, but it cannot tell us whether one arrangement is morally better or worse than another. Natural law produces effects, not moral obligations. Evolutionary explanations do not help. At best, they identify traits that aid survival. But this behavior promoted survival is not the same as this behavior is good. And let me repeat that one again, because this is very important. The statement, this behavior promoted survival, is not the same as this behavior is good. To equate survival with goodness is to smuggle in moral value from outside the system. Without God, morality can be reduced only to preference or pragmatism, and neither is sufficient to ground the reality of evil. Evil is more than what I dislike or what harms the group. Evil is the violation of a transcendent standard of good, and only God can supply such a standard. So the defense of premise two would go like this. Evil exists. This cannot be denied without denying reality. Genocide, torture, child abuse, these are not mere taboos or inconveniences. They are intrinsically wrong. Even when atheists appeal to the problem of evil against God, they implicitly concede that evil is real. Because if they don't, then the problem of evil falls apart as an argument against the existence of God. But to affirm evil is already to assume the very standard that points us back to God. So the conclusion for argument one is the reality of evil is not evidence against God, it is evidence for God. Since evil is real and natural law cannot provide the standard that makes it real, God must exist. So argument two, the argument from human personhood. And if you want to get a full treatment of this argument, I would invite you to read my book, Machines Don't Laugh. And I published this book a few years ago, and I have received some pretty positive reviews on this book. And the central argument of the book is that if God does not exist, then human beings are nothing more than biological machines determined by impersonal natural processes. Machines, no matter how complex, do not laugh, and they do not love, they do not feel compassion, they do not experience remorse. Human beings do laugh, they do love, they do feel compassion. And there's a whole litany of other properties that human beings have that transcend mere machinery. Therefore, human beings are not mere machines. And if human beings are not mere machines, then God exists. Because if God does not exist, again, my premise one, human beings are nothing more than biological machines that are determined by impersonal natural processes. So if human beings are not mere machines, God exists, and therefore God exists. So let's go through the premises. If atheism is true, human beings are reducible to chemistry and physics. No soul, no immaterial mind, only blind natural processes. But machines do not possess consciousness or moral awareness. They can simulate outputs, but they cannot feel. They can process data, but they cannot love or weep. Human beings, however, do all these things. Each of us knows firsthand the experience of joy, grief, compassion, and moral guilt. It follows that we are not reducible to machinery. Personhood requires a personal source. No impersonal process can generate conscious, intentional, moral agents. The existence of human personhood is best explained by the existence of a personal God. Conclusion of argument 2, machines don't laugh, but we do. Therefore, we are not mere machines, and since we are not mere machines, God must exist. Argument 3, the argument from rational knowledge. The argument goes like this. Premise 1, if God does not exist, then natural law determines all human beliefs. Premise 2, if all beliefs are determined solely by non-rational physical causes, then none are rationally inferred or justified. Premise 3, if none of our beliefs are justified, human knowledge is impossible. Premise 4, human knowledge is not impossible. Premise 5, therefore all beliefs are determined by non-rational physical causes. Premise 5, therefore not all beliefs are determined by non-rational physical causes. And then conclusion, therefore God exists. So the defense of the premises. Atheism implies naturalistic determinism. Every belief is the product of prior physical states. But if beliefs are wholly determined by physics, their truth or falsity is irrelevant. In other words, we believe things not because they are true or false, but because physics and chemistry determine us to believe those things. Beliefs occur because of molecular collisions, not supporting evidence. Again, let me repeat that one. It's important. Beliefs occur because of molecular collisions, not supporting evidence. If justification never enters the story, then knowledge is impossible. But knowledge plainly exists. To deny it is to make a knowledge claim, which is self-defeating. Therefore, rational freedom exists, the capacity to assess reasons and believe on the basis of truth rather than blind causation. Rational freedom requires a transcendent rational source. Reason itself must be grounded in reason, and this points directly to God. So the conclusion of argument 3 is knowledge is real. Determinism precludes it. Therefore, God exists. And my closing would be that I want to return to my concession. I want to return to where I began. I can see this debate at this very moment, not because the arguments are weak, but because winning is not my ultimate goal. The pursuit of truth is what matters to me. Victory in a debate is fleeting, but truth endures. If this exchange has sharpened our minds and clarified our assumptions and pushed us closer to reality, then it has served my purpose. Truth is not a prize to be seized. It is a reality to which we must yield. And the truth is that God exists.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much for that, Phil. And yeah, and that's great. On the spot, because you were prepared for the debate tomorrow, kind of thing. There was a misunderstanding, so I think you delivered that opening really well, given your chaotic nature, as you said. So great, great
My
job.
chaotic nature.
Your chaotic
The
situation.
nature of your chaotic
Yeah.
I thought I was only in a chaotic situation. I didn't know I had a chaotic nature, but I probably do.
I didn't want to tell you, but yeah,
Yeah.
sorry. So we'll go to the atheist now. Juan, on your again, you can have 10 minutes or less, whatever you want to use to kind of give your case for atheism.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for that opening. First of all, I want to say I'm very happy that I won the debate. So, no, I'm just kidding.
Congratulations.
Thank you. No, I'm just kidding. No, I think these are great arguments. And what I also like is that they are not like the usual arguments, like column cosmological argument, like most people use the first cause argument, which is very strong. I'm not saying it's weak at all. But these are interesting and new, have a new perspective. So I think generally what I would say about God, I'm an agnostic actually. I'm not sure maybe God could exist. I'm not close to the possibility. But I think if I believe in God, if I ever decide to believe in God, I will become something like a deist, like Anthony Flew, not really a theist. But what I will say generally is that God doesn't seem to be like absolutely necessary as an explanation. It's something like very broadly something that Graham Oppy will say that God doesn't really add anything as an explanation, like to the things that we need to explain, like whatever problems we have with saying that the world always exists by itself or that is logically necessary or whatever, it just seems like God will have the same problems. We could always ask, sure, why does something exist rather than nothing? But if you just say, well, because God exists and he created this, then I don't know. I think for me, the question is still there. Why does God exist rather than not existing? And to say, oh, well, God is necessary, is to say God has to exist. I don't know. For me, it seems a bit too easy. Like, okay, why can I say that the universe has the property of being necessary, right? Okay, but we are not here to discuss the cosmological argument. So my opponent in this debate would like to present that there are some things that require God as an explanation, namely the existence of evil, the personhood, and the reality of knowledge. And another thing I will say, if I maybe it's enough if we discuss this very interesting arguments, but if I was to present an argument of my own, I will present the problem of suffering as an argument against traditional theism. Because the way I see it is that the problem of evil, I like to call it the problem of suffering. For me, it is much more persuasive if you call it the problem of suffering, because evil is something that we can say is something that humans do with their freedom that is wrong. But suffering is like a question, okay, why did God make a world where human beings experience sometimes such tremendous suffering? Right? It's not clear, because when you think an infinitely loving or a maximally benevolent being, right, it will create it. If you wanted to create like many beings, like to love them, like it would have made them a paradise for them. And the Christian might say, well, yeah, that's exactly what he did originally, right? But that's another thing. I mean, if you imagine, for example, what do you feel? How do you feel? We have some degree of, I think humans are fundamentally benevolent, fundamentally kind in nature, like normally. How do you feel like about a dog or about a child? I think when you have a dog or a cat, you want to make him like a nice place so the dog can play. You want it to be happy. You don't want to hurt him or to hit him or anything. Like that's horrible, right? Like most people in Twitch like revolts against this and they want to pet the dog or whatever because you feel love. So imagine if we feel like that. Imagine God who is said to be like infinitely more loving and more perfect and benevolent. So that's what I would say. Like, what the explanation for the universe having the world having such this degree of suffering, right? So yeah, I think that would be for now. That would be enough as my opening.
All right, excellent. Yeah, thank you so much for your case there, Juan, and on your end. So, at this point, I think we've agreed to kind of go to an informal dialogue portion and that sort of thing. So, yeah, at this point, I will open it up to Phil and Juan, and maybe for the next, half an hour to 40 minutes, depending on how things are going, I might step in and bring in Omar to ask questions of each side and spur on the conversation if need be. So, all right, so over to the two debaters for now to have an informal dialogue.
Yeah. So do you want to start with the first argument, or do you want to say anything about my opening, maybe? Oh, I don't hear you.
You're muted.
Oh, you're muted.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I do, but like I said, I need to let my friend know who was supposed to be coming over that I'm doing this debate. And so let me just
No problem.
bear with me for just a second. This is going to be important because otherwise he's going to be standing at the door.
Like, I guess while we're waiting, then, Omar, did you have maybe a couple questions for Juan? Just I know we've just done the opening so far, but
Just the opening. No, I mean, the question of suffering is a good question, I think. It's a very good question. It's a question I've had before. I think, Dale, we even kind of debated that once when we talked about hell and
yeah.
the existence of hell on a bigger scale. But, it's interesting. I've seen, who was it? Alex O'Connor uses the question of animal suffering and kind of even removes humans from the equation and says, animals have been here for hundreds of millions of years, dying and living and suffering and eating each other and being torn to pieces, buried in volcanoes and this and that. And what is the purpose of that? Why would God inflict all that mass suffering for many millions of years before humans even come onto the scene and become part of the question? So, I mean, just amplifying your argument on suffering.
Yeah, I think that's a clever move. What Alex O'Connor is doing there is that from the very start of the debate, he's denying the theist the ability to use the two most popular responses to the problem: the free will argument, because animals don't have free will, and the soul building theodicy, which is that the idea that suffering is useful to build our moral character or something. These are the two most popular responses to it, but they don't apply to animals. So
Right.
it's like even more difficult for the theists to respond to that.
All right, Phil, are you back now or?
Yeah.
Okay, so now thank you for that, Omar. Now I'll let you guys go into the informal dialogue, and then I'll bring Omar in about half an hour or 40 minutes, depending on how the convo is going. So yeah,
I just want to say real quick, my internet is bad. If I freeze or if I go out, I will send you an email quick. Hopefully it doesn't happen. Okay, sorry about that.
Okay. So we can be confident that somebody didn't just shoot you with a freeze ray and that you're dead or something.
Yeah.
We'd be very concerned about you if that happened. Yeah, we're looking out for you. We don't want you to suffer here.
Right.
All right. Well, I can make a couple of comments about that, and my first general comment is that that is not a difficulty for theists in any way, shape, or form. In fact, that is more of a difficulty for a non-theist, because if a non-theist is going to argue that animals suffer and that a good God, or that if God didn't exist, then he wouldn't allow that, or it wouldn't make any sense for him to allow that, then my question is, if there's no God, then what does it mean for animals to suffer? Animals are simply the product of blind evolution, and there's no soul built into those animals. And suffering implies that there is some kind of an emotional state that someone is responding to pain with. And if there's no soul there, if there's no emotion, then what is suffering? Suffering doesn't actually exist. Suffering is a completely incoherent concept in a non-theistic worldview. And so my question is, if God doesn't exist, what is wrong with animal suffering? And number two, how do you even know that animals are suffering? Because suffering requires something more than what natural law can provide for biological life.
Yeah. Sure. I mean, what I will say to that is that it is it is presented as an internal critique, right? In a way. So theists do believe, I assume theists do believe that animals can suffer or not. Like just forgetting about the fact where a non-theistic worldview accounts for the existence of this. Theists do believe that animals suffer, or don't they? Right? They do believe that, right?
Some do and some don't. I
Right.
actually don't believe that animals suffer
Oh, okay. So would you
because
go with so?
because suffering requires a soul.
Okay.
Suffering requires emotion. And I don't believe that animals have emotion because I don't believe that animals have a soul. In the biblical worldview, human beings are created in the image of God. And that means that human beings have a non-material spiritual nature to them. And animals do not have that non-material spiritual nature because they are not made in the image of God. Now, I believe that animals experience pain, but suffering and pain are not the same thing. And because I can go to the doctor and I can get a shot in my arm, and that shot might be painful, but I'm not suffering. Suffering is an emotional response to pain. And so I'm not suffering when I get that shot. I can simply sit there and endure that pain, and I have no emotional response to that pain whatsoever. So my experience as a human being and other people's experience as human beings actually demonstrates that pain and suffering are not the same thing. So the fact that animals experience pain does not mean they are suffering.
Okay. I would just say if that, because the reason is not like we don't see it as suffering is because the shot lasts like 1 second. I assure you, if this shot was stronger and it was like half an hour there, I assure you will say, okay, I was suffering during this half an hour. Okay, that's because it's just small shot, right? If it was pain, half an hour, you cannot say that I'm not suffering. That's anyone will say they will suffer, they were suffering in that moment. It was worth it maybe later, but in that moment, half an hour, and it's really strong. I think most people will say, yeah, I was suffering.
Most people might say they were suffering, but suffering is not a necessary response to pain. So I can have a shot for a half an hour and I can experience great pain for a half an hour, and I can choose my emotional responses. That's part of what being human beings is about. I can choose if I want to respond emotionally to any given stimulus. For example, I can have an argument with a friend of mine and I can allow myself to get angry while I'm having that argument with my friend. Or I can choose to be calm and I can choose not to have a certain emotional response. So my emotional responses are subject to my will. They are not masters over me. And I think that's part of what being human is all about. Part of being made in the image of God is that we can control our emotions. But the other aspect of this, though, is that in order to prove that animals suffer, you have to prove that animals experience emotion, because suffering is an emotional state. And I don't see any evidence, either from natural law or from anything else, biology, whatever it happens to be, that animals have emotions and that animals suffer. Now, some theists disagree with me, but this is not a necessary point of contention, and no theist is obligated to actually believe that animals suffer. And if animals don't suffer because they don't have emotions, then because they're not made in God's image, and you're talking about an internal critique, so if you want to critique that internally, then I will respond to that internal critique by saying that I believe God exists. I believe that God created everything that exists. I believe that God created animals. I believe that God created human beings. And in the Christian worldview, man is made in God's image. Animals are not. And so a theist, a Christian theist like me, has no obligation to actually believe that animals suffer. And the other point here is that a Christian theist is not obligated to believe in evolution, and is not obligated to believe that animals have suffered over the course of millions of years. in my Christian worldview, God created all of life, and I don't believe that evolution actually took place. I don't accept the evidence for evolution. In fact, I've written extensively on the question of evolution. And so in my worldview, I don't believe that evolution occurred. I believe that God created nature in a pristine state that was in a normal state where no creatures experienced pain. And that pain is a result of the fall, is a result of an abnormal state that was precipitated by the fall of man. And once that occurred, man began to suffer, and animals began to experience an abnormal state where now they are red in tooth and claw, and now animal pain is introduced into the picture as a result of the fall, as a result of nature becoming subject to an abnormal state. And if that's the case, animal pain exists because of the fall, not because of a long evolutionary process. And furthermore, even though animal pain is a result of the fall, I still don't see enough evidence to convince me, or to be convincing, that animals actually have emotions, that they actually suffer. And if you want to do an internal critique, I would critique that you have a better critique available to you than evolution. I would suggest that if anyone wants to make this an internal critique of a theist, especially of a Christian, then I would point to the Old Testament sacrificial system, where animals were slaughtered for the sacrificial system in the Old Testament. And so animals, if animals suffer, then the sacrificial system was one of the most egregious causes of that suffering of everything. And if that's the case, then your internal critique would be much, much stronger if you would focus on the Old Testament sacrificial system. So, and I don't believe that the Old Testament animal sacrifice, I don't believe that system was cruel, because I don't believe that animals suffer.
Okay. So you don't believe animals suffer? Yeah, I think a lot of people will have some issues with that. Like for example, you say you have horses, right? Like if I see in a movie a horse break his leg and he's going to like be in the floor, right? And they have to move on. They don't let him suffer for days. They shoot him in the head, and that's shown as the humane thing to do, because poor horse. Or an even better happen if you have a dog and the dog is just too sick, in a state when he's in too much pain, he's too sick and it's not going to get better. What do people do? We say, okay, let's pull the poor dog down, and it's done. We don't do it. We don't let the dog, we don't say, let's just let him starve over days without that pain. Nobody does that, because that will be inhumane. In fact, you will go to jail. You could go to jail if you mistreat dogs. Why? Because we understand intuitively that that's wrong, that this is a wrong thing, that's suffering. So in a way, if we understand that this is a wrong thing, and we hold people morally responsible for mistreating animals, then the being who also set up this scenario will also have some degree of moral responsibility. Now, you will explain it with the fall, right? So man disobeyed God, and they fall, and this changed animals somehow, that they now feel pain. My question is, why did the fall of man had to make animals change in this way? It didn't have to happen like automatically. If it happened, it's because God went and changed the animals on purpose after man did that. Like there is no obvious way why man falls and then animals have to become like this. I don't see it. So why will God have to do it like actively? We have to change the animals, or to make them start eating each other, or make them able to feel pain, or however you think it actually happened,
Yeah, in the Christian worldview, when the fall occurred, it wasn't just man that fell. Man fell, but once man fell, excuse my grammar, once man fell, God pronounced a curse over all of creation. And so it wasn't just man who was cursed. It was creation who was cursed. And so therefore, all of creation became abnormal at that point as a result of the curse.
Yeah. Yeah, but my question is, why did he have to curse creation if only man fell? Why
You
was
have
the
to
need
ask
to curse all of creation?
you have to ask him.
Yeah.
That's above my pay grade.
Okay. Yeah, that's okay. Sure.
And there is no prima facie assumption that we are obligated to accept that it was somehow cruel for God to curse creation as a result of the fall.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
I'm under no obligation to accept that, to accept that premise. And if someone wants to argue that it was cruel or inappropriate for God to curse all of creation as a result of man's fall, then you would have to argue for it. You can't just assert it.
Yeah. Sure.
Do you guys want to discuss Phil's arguments as well?
Yeah, better. Yeah. I think we should move on to the actual arguments. Yeah. So the first argument, right? It's kind of like the moral argument a bit, right? But it says it's focused on the existence of evil. Do you know by chance? Do you know a guy called Box Day? Okay, but a guy called Box Day. He makes this argument also that Christianity is able to explain evil. But okay, you don't know him. It's okay, but he's a big blogger. He's a big Christian blogger.
I'm not sure I can understand the name well enough.
Box Day. It's a pseudonym. It's not a name. I think but okay. Whatever.
Okay.
You're saying
Whatever.
I'm sorry.
VOX.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Okay, the point is Box Day.
BOX?
Yeah. Like this. I'm gonna show it. Box Day. No,
Just spell it.
Vox?
Box Day, like days, like Monday is a day, Box Day.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. But whatever. Okay, the thing is, first of all, let me you seem to define evil as something that goes against an out. Okay, you say objective evil, right? What was the word object? That's better, because if you had said evil, evil is not necessarily going against a rule or against an out, right? For example, a crazy example, a guy in North Korea who is a totalitarian, he makes a new law saying that if you eat food with your left hand, that this is forbidden. It goes against the law, right? That doesn't mean that if somebody does that, now this is an evil act, right? This is not everything that goes against an out or against a rule is evil, right? The way I see it, evil, the word evil, for me, the meaning it implies, it's not just going against a rule by itself. It implies hurting other people, for no reason. That's how I will define the word evil or immoral. So I think that's the discussion will, there was saying the discussion will probably hinge on the definition of objective evil or the definition of moral, because when you look at the definitions, what is evil? Okay, it's something, I checked in the dictionary, it's something that goes against, it's something that is profoundly immoral. And what is immoral? It's something that is not conformed to a standard. Okay, that's the key part, is the standard. What is the standard? Is that an objective standard, or can it be a standard set by society, for example? I think you could just define evil as conforming to the standard set by society. So you will have some definition of some concept of evil. I mean, that I just want to hear what do you think of my definition of evil? Is just hurting someone for no good reason. Just maybe, do you have any comments on this or anything?
Well, I'm not sure I understand the point, but if you want to know how we define evil, are you saying that we don't have an objective definition of evil, and therefore we can't identify any specific event or act or condition as being
Yeah.
evil?
Yeah, what the point I'm trying to make is that for you, you will define evil as something that goes against the law of God, right? But me, I will propose another definition. I will say evil is just hurting people, something that hurts people for no good reason. That's how we'll define evil. What do you
Something that
think of the
hurts,
definition?
something that hurts people for no good reason?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's what I will say is evil. It's like,
So that
for me, this kind of makes sense. Like what normal people colloquially think of the word evil is something like hurting people or making people suffer for no reason. That's like what we refer to when we say something is evil.
Okay. Well, so I would ask two questions then. First of all, you have to establish the reality of suffering before you can start using it in an argument. And I haven't heard, I don't think I've heard you actually establish that suffering exists objectively. In other words, you see what I'm saying? I mean, if you can say evil is making somebody suffer for no good reason,
Right.
all right? But before you can bring that argument and bring that premise to the table, you have to establish that there's something wrong with suffering, and you have to establish that suffering is a reality in this world. And my original argument about evil and suffering is that if there's no God, then natural law is all there is. Natural law in the material universe and natural law that governs it. And natural law is not going to produce the reality of suffering, the concept of suffering.
Okay. Yeah.
Natural law, and then so the second part of what you said is that evil is causing suffering for no good reason. Well, what do you mean by no good reason? Why does there have to be a criteria for a reason to make some kind of biological life form, whether it's human or animal, suffer? So how do you define no good reason? Are you talking about whether or not it's justified to make a biological life form suffer? Is that what you're talking about? So and as soon as you say justified, you're smuggling in a standard, aren't you?
Yeah.
Where does that standard come? Where does the criteria come to judge any particular motive as a good reason or not a good reason?
Yeah, you're right. That's like that would be the weakness in my definition. I'm trying to come up with an objective definition of evil or immoral. What I would say is a good reason is protecting your life, your well-being, or your property, which will also be related to your well-being. I think that will be, I will define it as that's a good reason. Like what I want to say is I cannot say evil is always hurting other people is always evil, because there are cases like in self-defense. If you're doing it to protect your life, now it's not evil to hurt other people. But if you do it only for the sake of it, like only for fun, now it becomes evil. That's the definition I'm proposing. I'm just proposing a definition. I don't think I need to prove that suffering exists in terms of merely proposing a definition, because otherwise you have to do the same. If you tell me evil is something that goes against the law of God, then you also have to establish first the existence of God, right? So we wouldn't get anywhere. I'm just proposing a definition here. So that's why.
Yeah, no, I'm not arguing that evil is a violation of the law of God.
Okay.
What I'm arguing is that if God does not exist, then there's no way to define evil. There's no criteria to judge something as evil, because there's no criteria to judge it as good. So if you could say that violating my or taking my life or threatening my life, causing harm to me or something like that is evil because you're bringing harm to me without a good reason. My fundamental question is, what is wrong with taking my life or taking my property? Why is that a bad thing? And before you can say taking somebody's life or property without good reason is a bad thing, before you can say that, you have to say that there's something wrong with somebody's life or property being taken from them. And my contention is that natural law cannot give you an answer to that question. Natural law can't tell you why there's something wrong with taking my life, because we're just all biological machines, and we just came from the slime out of pure chance and from an impersonal universe. If that's the case, then what's wrong with killing a child? What's wrong with killing me? What's wrong with taking my property away from me? I have no rights. Natural law can't give me any rights.
Yeah.
That makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, I
I'm
understand
sorry.
what you mean when like it is difficult to ground in an objective way. Okay, why is this wrong? What I want to say is that I will simply define it as that. You just define it. They are wrong by definition. We define wrong, we define morally bad as making others suffer for no reason. So that's it. There is no question or a question, why is making suffering others morally bad? So we just define morally bad as making others suffer for no reason. So that's the basic. We will start from that definition.
Okay. Well, as a theist, I would not agree to start with that definition, because that definition is simply coming out of thin air. What I would probably call out would be the fallacy of begging the question. Because as soon as you say the definition of evil is taking someone's life for no good reason, then I can't just accept that as a definition, as a stipulative definition, and expect that to actually be binding on all moral agents, because I would ask the question, what's wrong with taking my life for no good reason? And how do you determine what the criteria for what is a good reason and what is not a good reason? Every time you use the phrase "for no good reason," I would say that what you're doing is you're smuggling in a principle, a moral principle, and you're getting that moral principle out of a hat. You're not grounding that moral principle in anything. And a theist would insist on grounding moral principles in something, that moral principles don't just appear out of nowhere. And if that's the case, then I'm afraid I can't agree to your definition, because I don't see you basing that definition on reality. I just see you coming up with an arbitrary definition, and definitions can't be arbitrary like that. You know.
Okay.
Can I just step in? Just a couple clarifying questions to help you with the discussion and kind of thing before moving on to the second argument. But okay, so Juan, in your case, I'm just kind of curious. You're trying to make the point? I think you're denying one of Phil's premise. You're saying there is no objective standard of evil. There's just
Yeah.
a subjective one, and you've subjectively or arbitrarily defined it as harm with no good reason, subjective. That's what you're trying to say. So
Yes.
you're denying there is
Yes.
a subjective stand. And Phil, on your end, just to help Juan in your discussion, could you give what is your definition of evil? Just so Juan knows what he's working with, and then I'll let you guys continue your discussion to.
Well, my definition of evil is whatever violates whatever is good.
What is good? What is good?
Yeah,
The definition of good.
for a theist, what is good is derived from God's moral nature, his perfect moral nature. It's not I don't appeal to the law of God. I appeal to the nature of God. And
Right.
so what is good is grounded in the nature of God and what is consistent with the nature of God. What is evil is whatever violates the nature of God. In other words, whatever violates good.
Sure.
But here's this is the point that I kind of want to drive home here. And that is that Juan, you want to come up with a definition of evil that says to inflict suffering for no good reason. That seems to be a good summary of your definition. And tell me
Yeah.
if I'm wrong, because
Yeah, that's
I could be wrong. If you ever watch my podcasts, by the way, I almost always, not always, but I almost always open my podcast with my initial declaration: I could be wrong. I'm not infallible. So what I don't ever want to misrepresent what you have to say, and that's why I wanted to make sure that I understood your definition. And so your definition of evil, if I'm right about this, is inflicting suffering on some other being for no good reason. Okay.
Yeah.
At the same time, you're claiming that there's no objective standard for what constitutes evil.
No, I
Is that
don't
right?
think that. No. Actually, my opinion is a bit funny here because I have a lot of discussion with other atheists on this. I do believe that morality is objective. I actually do believe it's objective, but only the is part. I think the out part, I don't think atheists or naturalists can get you that. I agree with Taste on this. I have a funny mixed opinion. I actually do think that morality, at least on the way that colloquially what normal people understand as morality, because then we get the issue of course, if you're going to define morality as going against the love of God, then of course I will disagree with that definition. Do you see how we cannot even start agreeing on definitions, right? So it maybe it's a bit complicated, but the word morality, the way normal people use it, I do think it's kind of like an objective thing. It's not like my opinion kind of thing. But I also, at the same time, I also think that there is no out component to it, that naturalists cannot get you the obligation to the out because nothing happens to me automatically if I'm immoral. I have an obligation. For me, to have an obligation means that something bad happens to me if I don't do that. For example, I have an obligation to go to work because otherwise I won't get money, or I have an obligation to follow the law. But I don't think I have an obligation, like on principle, to be moral, right? Obviously, society has laws, and most immoral things are also illegal, right? But they are not necessarily the same thing. So I have like a mixed opinion on morality.
But when Dale was trying to clarify the definitions and clarify your position, he pretty much said, Juan, for you, there's no objective morality. Isn't that what Dale said?
I don't know. Maybe I got it wrong. I'm not sure. No, I think it's objective. I think
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you do believe that there's such a thing as objective morality?
Yeah. Yes.
All right. But you don't believe that we are obligated to follow any kind of objective moral principle?
That's right.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So here's my observation then about that, and I could be wrong. Okay. Here's my observation about that. When you say that evil is causing suffering to another being for no good reason, that is a statement of obligation, because it assumes that you're obligated to have a good reason not to, or that you're obligated to have a good reason to cause suffering. You're obligated to have a good reason to protect another being from suffering unless it's absolutely necessary. So it sounds like you're contradicting yourself here, because you're saying I don't have any obligation to follow any moral principles, but I do have an obligation not to make something suffer for no good reason.
Well,
Isn't that an obligation?
No, I don't have an obligation, because nothing to me. If you say I have an obligation not to do this, no, because nothing bad happens to me. I will be like, so what? I mean, nothing happens to me. Hypothetically, my conscience wouldn't like it, but I will be evil. If I did this, I will be evil, but I don't have an obligation not to be evil. If that makes sense. Does that make sense?
Okay. But then if that's true, then what happens to the definition of evil? Because
The definition
evil is doing something.
is
Do you see
hurting.
what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Evil is inflicting harm or suffering on
yeah,
another being for no good reason.
right. That's
And
right.
if you think that's evil, but you don't think you have an obligation not to do that?
Yeah, for me, the word obligation is like very strong. If you tell me I have an obligation, like a real obligation to do this, like for me, I only have an obligation, like strictly speaking, to go to work, to follow the law, for example, because something bad automatically happens to me if I don't do this. So I have a really obligated to do this. It's not like you have, but the other thing, if nothing happens to me automatically, nothing bad happens to me automatically, if I don't do this, then I'm not obligated to do this, right? You know?
Okay. Well, so are you defining obligation as kind of a experiencing the consequences
Yes,
of doing something? Is
yes,
that kind of where your thought about
yes.
obligation comes
That's
from? Okay.
that's right. The way
Okay.
I see it, the way yeah, okay.
Okay. Well, I think I understand then. So if that's true, then my observation that saying evil is inflicting harm on another creature or another being without good reason is not about obligation.
Right,
It,
right,
it,
right,
it
right.
sounds it sounds like that you're coming up with a definition of evil that is uh, just simply a statement of what is. It's
Right,
not
right,
a
right.
it's not a statement of what ought.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
so here's my proposal. This is what I would propose about your definition of evil. Your definition of evil is not describing anything wrong. Your definition of evil is simply a definition of a brute fact that is true, and that there are no moral implications of that brute fact. In other words, evil is not something wrong. Evil is just simply a condition that exists where you're causing something to suffer for no good reason.
Yeah.
And so it seems to me that kind of removes your argument against God, because in order to say that the theist is misguided in believing in God because of this moral posture, we're saying that there's something wrong with inflicting harm with against another being without a good reason. But if what you're saying is there's nothing wrong with it, this is just the definition of a brute fact of what exists. But if that's the case, your argument against God disappears. It collapses. It falls apart. It's no longer an argument against God, because now you're saying that God doesn't have an obligation, or there's nothing wrong with God making animals suffer. And if that's the case, then the whole objection and the whole internal critique against Christianity, that all evaporates, because you're not arguing from a moral posture. You're simply arguing from brute fact. And so if there's nothing wrong with God making animals suffer, then what happens to your argument? Doesn't it go
Yeah.
away?
Okay, here's the thing. I think the problem of evil is usually stated as some kind of internal critique. You want to say that there is an inconsistency between one property and this other thing. In this case, the property will be benevolent. Now, something is benevolent. If something, a being is benevolent, it's not that he fulfills his obligations. It's that he's kind or wants good and, not to inflict suffering on other beings. It's not that, like, for example, I could say, if God God is evil, and yeah, nothing happens to God. God is not doing like failing any kind of obligation. He doesn't have any obligation. No, God is all powerful, and he can do whatever he wants to his beings, and what he wants is to make them suffer. That's it. God didn't have any obligation because nothing is above him. That evil God, for example, he didn't have any obligation. So if I were to say there is an evil God, he just wants to create beings to torture them, for example, hypothetically. That God is evil because he wants to make them suffer. That's it. That's the definition of evil. But that God didn't have any obligation to not to do this because nothing is above him. So in a way, nothing is yeah, he did nothing wrong. If you define wrong as, for example, not doing your homework or not like for a child, but that God is evil in the sense that he wants to make people suffer, right? And if you go tell me, no, that being is good, morally good, I will say, no, he wants to make being suffer, right? It's not about, it will be a separate, it's not about whether God had this obligation and he failed to fulfill that. That's how I will see it.
All right. So I just want to make sure we do have two other arguments from Phil. So
Yeah.
you guys want to spend some time on the second argument now about human
Well,
personhood.
well, let me just wrap
Sure.
up and just respond a little bit to what Juan said here. The argument that from evil does not prove that God exists, that God does not exist. So here, let's go back to the fundamental question of the debate. The fundamental question of the debate is theism versus atheism. Does God exist? Does God not exist? The only thing that the argument from evil can hope to achieve is to say that if God exists, he's not good.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sure.
But your argument is irrelevant and off topic for the actual question of the debate, because you're not arguing that God doesn't exist. You're just arguing that God isn't good if he does exist, because he allows creatures to suffer.
Yeah.
And so, my argument is that if evil exists, then there is some kind of objective standard that is not being met in the world, in the universe. And if God does not exist, then there is no objective standard for what is good and evil. And if that's the case, then if evil exists, then that implies that God does exist, because if God does not exist, evil would not exist. And therefore, if God does not exist and evil does not exist, then there's no argument for the existence of God there, one way or the other.
Right.
So.
But yeah, no.
All right.
No, I think that's fine.
Yeah. All right. Well, how about you guys start discussing the argument from human personhood? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So to recap, right? Your idea is that machines can never possibly do what humans do, which is be conscious, to love, right? To have feelings and emotions. That's your contention, right? Am I right?
It's much more than just feelings and emotions.
Okay.
It's a broad consideration of the totality of human nature. So humans, they not only have emotions, but humans are creative. Humans compose symphonies. Humans have a concept of beauty, and they distinguish between beauty and ugliness. And humans they do have an emotional reaction to beauty and ugliness, but the very fact that they have the concept of beauty is not something that natural law would ever build into biological beings like human beings. So human beings love, human beings hate, they care for each other. Machines don't care. One machine doesn't care if the machine next to it gets destroyed. And machines have no illusions. Machines cannot be deceived, because machines don't have the concept of truth. They only have data. They don't have a concept of what's true and what's false. They don't have a concept of what's illusory. They don't have a concept of what's real and unreal. Machines don't have any of those concepts. because there's nothing there to build those concepts into machines, into biological machines that have no free will. And by the way, when I say that if there's no God, humans are biological machines with no free will, that phrase didn't originate with me. That actually came from Stephen Hawking. If you read his book, The Grand Design, I can pull up that quote for you. And so Stephen Hawking said, human beings are just biological machines with no free will, and that free will is an illusion. That's what he said. And in the book, I'd be willing to send you a personal copy of my book. You don't have to buy it. I would be happy to send it to you. And in the book, I point out how ironic and almost humorous it is that Stephen Hawking says that if all this is true, there's no God guiding all of this, that human beings are merely biological machines with no free will, and that free will is an illusion. That's what he said. But machines cannot have illusions. And so what he's saying is that human beings are biological machines that have illusions. But a machine doesn't have an illusion. It's impossible for a machine to be deceived or to have a false belief, to have an illusion, to think that something is somewhere or has some kind of nature, whereas it has a completely different nature, and the original nature that machine thought it had is an illusion. That's logically incoherent, logically absurd to say that a machine can have illusions. And yet that is exactly what Stephen Hawking said. And so, yeah, it's a broad spectrum of the components and the properties of human nature that we love, that we hate, that we get angry. How can a machine get angry? How can a machine feel gratitude? How can a machine actually think that we should somehow come up with a governing body that promotes justice in our society? How can a machine ever come up with the concept of justice? It's absolutely absurd to think that a machine would come up with the concept of justice. So there's a broad spectrum, and I could go into, I give a long list in the book of all the characteristics of human beings that they would not have if natural law and the universe, material universe, is all that existed. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I have a couple of comments about this. The first one is very simple. It's like, how can you be sure that no machine, no matter how, no theoretically machine, like ever in a million few years, could be conscious? Like, there's a science fiction trope idea, like they make someone invents artificial intelligence that is like conscious, and it's a robot, like you can't feel, iRobot. There is this very popular in science fiction, like at some point it gets complex enough, and like, wow, the thing is actually has a sense of self, it actually thinks, and you think one thing is crazy, but what if he was? Are you sure? How are you sure that this is not like that? This is theoretically impossible, because I'm not sure of this. What if this got made at some point? Are you sure that this is completely impossible?
So what you're asking is, how do I know that machines, that the biological machines that exist that we call human beings, that were not created and not designed, how do I know that they could never achieve consciousness? How do I know that they could never achieve a concept of justice? How do I know that they could never feel? Is that what you're asking me?
No. I mean, like in the future, like many millions of years in the future, how do you know that humans will not create a robot or a computer that has self-awareness? How do you know that? Are you sure that this cannot possibly happen?
Okay. I want you to pay close attention to what you just said. How do you know that human beings couldn't create a robot that had consciousness?
Yeah.
Do you understand what you just said?
Yeah, why? Is it crazy?
You said, how do we know that human beings are intelligent, designing, creatures. Human beings are engineers.
Yeah.
But if there's no God, there is no designer that's ever going to design a machine that's going to have intelligence, or a machine that's going to have some kind of consciousness, or some kind of moral awareness, or some kind of concept of justice or injustice. See, you're talking about human beings who are intelligent and creative, designing machines that sometime in the future might have these characteristics. But under your worldview, there is no designer.
Mm-hmm. Right. No, but
So
yeah.
your objection actually relies on my worldview in order to be valid. If my worldview is false, then your objection is false as well. Your objection is invalid.
Right. No, yeah, I think it's two different arguments. One is to say that we need a designer, because what I will say there is that maybe evolution can act as a design, some form of designer. The other argument is, you say that machines can never do what humans do. And my question is like, okay, but what about a billion years in the future? Is it possible that we built a robot that can feel things or have self-awareness, right?
You just said we create a robot.
Yes.
But under your worldview, intelligence did not create the machines that we call human beings.
Right.
So every time you say create, you're talking about intelligent design. And under your worldview, there's no such thing as intelligent design. Everything came from chance. Everything came from a probabilistic universe that was deterministic, determined by natural law. And there is no intelligence behind it. If you want to read Richard Dawkins, his book, I'm trying to think of the name of the book where he said this, because he's written so many books, and I've read most of them. But in one of his books, he said, we have to understand that in the beginning of everything that we call the evolutionary process, there is no intelligence, no understanding. That's the word he used. And then he used another word, that no awareness of anything at all. You begin with no intelligence. You begin with no awareness of anything. And what he's telling us is that physical universe, governed by natural law, in the absence of understanding, in the absence of awareness of anything at all, the absence of intelligence, is going to produce machines that have these sophisticated characteristics, like thinking and like feeling and like consciousness and all of these various aspects of human beings. And so if you say, how do you know that a machine can't be created that has these properties sometime in the future? As soon as you say created, you're denying everything that Richard Dawkins just said. You begin with no intelligence. So you can't have an intelligence creating a machine that has consciousness. So what you have to ask me, Juan, is, Phil, how do you know that non-intelligence can never produce intelligence and sophisticated characteristics like human beings have? That's the question that you need to ask me. But it's not the question you're asking me. The question you're asking me is, Phil, how do you know that intelligent man couldn't create machines that might have consciousness sometime in the future? But you can't ask me that question. Because on your worldview, there is no creation. There is no intelligence creating a machine. It's not there. So you're smuggling in, you're borrowing from my worldview in order to try to argue against my worldview. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Sure. So what I will say there is, I will simply appeal to evolution as a process able to generate a complex biological life. I will say that this looks, a human animal looks very complicated, but the thing is, the Earth is really, really old. If you give it like for like thousands of millions of years of eventual, like if you start from something that can replicate itself, some form of life, some simple. If you allow it to go to gradual changes, and if these changes build up over time, it's always built up. Like it can always be done. It can always accumulate. It can start very simple, but it can always accumulate things. If you give it I'm not obviously not infinite, but if you give it thousands of millions of years, like for all we know, the universe may never end. So if you give it an absolute amount of time and things always add up, then at some point, this natural process may end up with something that is incredibly complex, right? So that's the idea of how evolution will account for these complex machines, so to say, biological machines.
Okay. Yeah, I understand that, and I deal with that thought, with that idea in the book. In fact, if you guys don't mind, I would love to read the chapter or a few paragraphs in my book that deal with that question. Yeah, would that be okay, Dale? If I
Yeah, go ahead. Well, so go ahead and read that.
because I can put this in a lot better terminology than I can.
Yeah, go ahead. And after you read that, I'll give Juan the last word on this round. Then we'll move on to the third argument for the final bit. So yeah, go ahead and read the quotes, and then I'll get Juan the last word to respond to it.
Okay, bear with me for just a second.
No problem.
Sure.
If we're filling time, while we're waiting for that, I do have a question for you, Juan, but so it's going back a ways. Okay, yeah. So it's on the existence of evil. You guys were talking about the standard for evil and stuff like that. And you said, look, you just argue for the is part, not the ought and stuff. And I just wanted to get like what is the difference then if it's all just is, it's all reducible to is, what's the difference between me killing someone and a rock killing someone? Wouldn't both be evil under your definition, or?
The rock, yeah, okay. Hurting someone for no good reason. Yeah, sure. I think one would have to specify in the definition that this is like something where an agent does it, right? Like because did a rock hurt someone for no reason? They are technically yes. So I guess, but no, obviously you cannot say that the rock did something evil, right? No, I think, yeah, what one would have to specify in the definition, like so it refers to things that agents can do. It's a property of acts that agents can do, maybe something like that. Yeah.
Sounds good. Yeah, so Phil's got the quotes, so read the quotes. Juan, you'll get the last response, and then we'll move on to the fourth and final argument for you guys to have your discussion before I bring in Omar for his questions.
Okay. All right. So I'm reading from Machines Don't Laugh, page 85. Recall our earlier observation that if there is no God, we are all nothing more than biological machines. We all have a pretty good idea of what machines are and how they behave. A machine that an engineer builds will obviously be more sophisticated than a machine that appears in the natural world by blind chance with no intelligence behind it. It follows necessarily that if machine an engineer builds does not have a given feature or property, since it is beyond the capabilities of the engineer, that feature will certainly not be found among the machines that would randomly appear in nature without any engineer or intelligence there to design and build them at all. This conclusion cannot be overstated. There are limits to what non-intelligence can accomplish. This should be obvious to any thinking person. We don't see computers and cell phones growing on trees in a forest. Now, the atheistic evolutionist may say not so fast. Mindless, random natural processes could produce a sophisticated machine like a computer given enough time. So after millions or billions of years, we are supposed to believe that it's possible that in that time, nature could produce what it would take an engineer far less time to produce. The difference between the two is intelligence. So gigantic stretches of time, plus the blind forces of nature, plus chance, without intelligence, are supposed to be able to accomplish what it takes intelligence to accomplish in less time. Time compensates for the lack of intelligence in this ideology. But what do you notice about the above doctrine? Has any scientist in history ever provided scientific evidence that given millions of years, non-intelligent natural forces have produced complex teleonomic machines? Since the history of science spans only a few hundred years, we obviously cannot test a hypothesis that takes millions of years to observe. Therefore, there is no way to avoid the obvious fact that this is another baseless article of faith. It is a philosophical idea with no basis in scientific fact. Evolutionists may tell us that all we have to do is observe the world around us with complex organisms containing sophisticated DNA code sequences. Isn't that scientific evidence for complex machinery evolving over millions of years without the aid of intelligence? What more scientific evidence do we need? But a moment's reflection reveals that this begs the question. You cannot assume what you are attempting to prove. The presence of complex life forms is not evidence of slow development over time, when another hypothesis would account for complex life forms as well. So there's no escape. The idea that sophisticated machines have appeared out of mindless, non-intelligent, random, impersonal natural processes within an enormous expanse of time is an unscientific article of faith. It will continue to be so long after we leave this vale of tears. So my objection to this argument is that this is an article of faith on the part of the atheistic evolutionists, that given millions of years, non-intelligence can produce intelligence. Non-intelligence can produce consciousness. Non-intelligence can produce imagination or justice. And all of these things are simply assumed under the atheistic evolutionary model. They're not proven scientifically. And that's what I call an article of faith. It is a faith answer. It's not a scientific answer. And when I observe that this is an article of faith and that it's a faith answer to my question, then I immediately go to the fact that theists and Christians in particular are constantly ridiculed for believing in things by faith without any evidence. But the idea that evolution can produce thinking machines and machines that are capable of emotion and machines that are capable of the concept of justice and illusions and love and hate and all these things, that idea is not a scientific idea because there's no scientific evidence for it. And if that's the case, it is just as much an article of faith as what we are accused of being, of what we are accused of putting forward ourselves. So if we can't simply lay something out as believing something by faith without any evidence, then those who criticize the theist position, they can't do that either. So Juan, when you tell me, how do you know that evolution can't produce this? Or when you tell me that evolution could produce this by all these gradual incremental changes over millions and millions and millions of years, what you're telling me is that this is possible, but there's no scientific basis for believing that, and so therefore you believe it by faith, and I'm not going to accept your belief by faith any more than you will accept my beliefs by faith.
Okay, so you want me to respond to that, and then
Yeah, you can.
okay. So yeah, I mean, what I will say just initially will be simply to say, okay, this goes into the topic of evolution, right? Is there good evidence for evolution or not, right? And that's like, I mean, that's an entirely different debate, right? There's a whole new topic. I mean, I would say...
I'm sorry, it's not about evidence for evolution.
Okay.
It's about evidence for whether or not evolution can produce the sophistication that you see in human beings.
Okay.
There's a big difference. There's a subtle difference between those two, but there's a big difference between those
Okay.
two.
Okay. Sure. Yeah. It will eventually, but I think it will still look at the same kind of things. It will look at what happens in nature, what do we see like in the fossils or in biology or whatever. It will be like an entirely different topic, right? And there are other atheists better than me, like at defending evolution, like Grayson Hawk or Planet Peterson, right? I'm not so good at that, but I would say it will be like, for example, the way I would say it, like if evolution, the way scientists propose it, if that's true, then I can respond to your argument and say, okay, maybe over millions of years, evolution could create these complex biological machines, right? But whether it's true or not, it will be a different debate. That's what I would say. Do you want to respond to that? Or, yeah, or we can move on to the other.
Let's move on to the final argument,
Okay.
and have you guys discuss the final from the existence of rational knowledge, and then after you guys discuss that for 10 minutes or so, I'll bring in Omar.
Yeah.
Omar, you've been so patient.
Oh, I've been listening. Yeah.
Did I see you fall asleep at one point?
Yeah, me too.
No, because I was actually just thinking and listening, and I closed my eyes. No.
All right.
I didn't fall asleep.
I'll believe
Even
that
though I
by
worked
faith.
all night. I worked a 12-hour shift last night. I didn't fall asleep.
Okay, well, I'll believe that by faith.
Yeah, I also work 12-hour shifts. Yeah, they suck. Yeah, you don't. It's like you don't
well,
have a life.
the good thing is I only have to do 3 of them, and then I'm off for 4 days. So
I do. Yeah.
Cool.
That's the good thing. I do 4 of them, sometimes 5 even. That sucks.
Oof, you work too hard.
Yeah.
I used to do that.
And it's physical labor, so yeah, it's not nice.
Oh,
yeah.
Awesome. All right, Juan. What do you want to discuss with Phil on the knowledge argument?
Yeah. Okay. So this reminds me of. So this argument reminds me of the tag argument. Do you know what the tag argument means? The tag argument.
The transcendental argument for God.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. There is a part of the transcendental argument that says there is a point to reach at something called the impossibility of the contrary. We arrive at the conclusion that knowledge is impossible. What they say is that this proposition implies a contradiction, right? And that therefore the premise that led to this must be false, right? I think that's an interesting argument. What I would say initially is this: the proposition knowledge is impossible, or humans don't have knowledge. Knowledge is impossible for humans. This proposition by itself, it does not imply any contradiction by itself. The contradiction arises when one claims to be a human and one claims to know this proposition, obviously, but the proposition by itself is not a contradiction. And this is important. Let me give you an example. The scenario, for example, an alien comes to Earth and it shoots a ray and it makes people brain dead, right? So it's like, okay, people now don't have knowledge. Humans, in this scenario, hypothetical scenario, humans don't have knowledge. Now, there is nothing logically contradictory about this scenario that you said. It doesn't matter because we are talking about a hypothetical scenario, and the mere statement itself, humans don't have knowledge, it does not contradict itself. Now, it would if I say I'm a human and I know this. Now it would. But by itself, it's not contradictory. The knowledge is impossible. It's not contradictory. So what I would say about that, there's a lot of things I can say about it, but let's grant you for the sake of the argument that natural processes that generated our beliefs are fallible and could be wrong. So maybe our beliefs and our knowledge could be wrong. So our knowledge is unreliable, right? But that's it. Nothing happens. We conclude our knowledge may be unreliable. And that's it. I don't really see like the logical contradiction in this. I think like this is like perfectly possible. And something else I would say, we know that sometimes our brains are fallible and sometimes they are unreliable. We know that sometimes we do make reasoning mistakes. So this doesn't do anything to me. I don't know what's the problem exactly.
Okay. Well, I could go back to the book and I could, because I cover this option in the book actually. But no, to I guess the best summary would be that that the term, or that the proposition knowledge is impossible implies its own contradiction, because the term knowledge is impossible implies that it is possible to understand the proposition knowledge is impossible.
Not necessarily. Not by humans, not by
Yeah.
humans, for example. Aliens could understand that even if humans didn't have knowledge.
Okay. So let's start with this premise. Would you accept the premise that it is possible to understand the proposition knowledge is impossible?
Yeah, for humans, yes, sure. Yeah, I will accept that. It is possible to understand
Okay.
this proposition, yes.
Okay. It's possible to understand. In order to understand something, you have to be able to comprehend the meaning of what you're understanding. Would you accept that?
Yeah.
Okay. So if knowledge is impossible, then it is impossible to comprehend the meaning of the proposition knowledge is impossible.
Or if knowledge, like if knowledge is actually impossible in reality, right, then nobody comprehends the meaning of these propositions. Yeah, let's say yes, because they will lack okay, sure. They will lack the knowledge
Yeah.
of basic meanings, of basic terms to comprehend anything. Sure, okay.
Right. No, so in other words, in order to comprehend that knowledge is impossible, we have to comprehend the meaning of the word knowledge, the meaning of the word is, and the meaning of the word impossible. We have to comprehend that we are dealing with a proposition, and we have to understand and comprehend and have knowledge of what a proposition is. And there's all sorts of other things that we would have to know in order to know that knowledge is impossible.
Again, but I'm
And we
not
have
saying
to,
human. Okay.
okay, but we are talking about humans here. We're talking about humans who are thinking logically. So you can't take humans out of the equation and simply deal with the proposition on its own, because if that's the case, then you're dealing with a proposition that has no comprehended meaning behind it. You're dealing with a meaningless proposition if you take humans out of the equation.
I think a proposition in the abstract sense has a meaning if the words that make up this proposition have meanings. And this stands even if there were no humans to hold these meanings in their brains. I think the proposition itself, like as an abstract thing, could still have a meaning if the words have a meaning.
Okay, how does natural law explain to me how a proposition can have knowledge under natural law with no mind there to create it and with no mind to comprehend it? How does meaning exist without any mind to comprehend that meaning?
Oh, what do you mean? What is your definition of meaning? I don't know. How would you define it? Like
What's
formally?
your definition of meaning? Because
I
you're the
would
one
have
that's
to look
using the
here.
term. You're the one that's using the term meaning. You're saying
That's right.
that the proposition has meaning, even if you take human beings or any kind of mind away from the formula.
Right.
That proposition intrinsically has meaning. That's what you're telling me.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay? How can a proposition, explain to me how a proposition has intrinsic meaning without a mind to comprehend that meaning?
Yeah, I would say. Yeah, I would say this applies like in the abstract sense. Like for example, yeah, the meaning of how do I say? The meaning of a book is what the word means is an object made of pages, right? And this meaning is an abstract, is a property of the word. And even if minds didn't exist, yeah, right. This word could still have this property. I mean, it wouldn't be the case. Sure, if no minds had ever existed, then it wouldn't be the case that someone assigned this meaning to that word. But I think
Okay,
yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about properties.
Mm-hmm.
We could debate the emergent property view and things like that. I'm not talking about properties. I'm talking about meaning.
Right. I will have to look at that. Yeah.
Yeah. Meaning has the definition of meaning is that there is some kind of concept or conceptual property, or not property. I shouldn't say conceptual property, because now I would be equivocating on the word property. The idea of meaning implies that there is an idea, that meaning is about ideas.
Right.
Ideas do not exist independent of minds. Ideas don't exist in the universe as just brute facts. Ideas are non-material, and ideas are the comprehension of whatever concept you're talking about. So meaning requires a mind. And what I would like to know is, how can you have meaning without a mind to comprehend that meaning? And if you say meaning is a property that something has, like the property of a book, then I'm not going to accept that answer, because that would be equivocating between meaning and property. I want to know how a meaning can exist without a mind. And this is very important because we're considering the proposition knowledge is impossible. And you're telling me that the proposition knowledge impossible has a specific meaning that is independent of any mind. If no minds existed whatsoever, the proposition knowledge is impossible would still have meaning. That's what you're telling me. And I strongly push back on that. And I would say the material universe with natural law, with no mind in existence whatsoever, is not going to give a proposition meaning. A proposition is an idea.
Yeah. No, I get what you say. No, it's a bit complicated to put in words like formally. I think, yeah, obviously, if no minds at all ever existed, then of course, words, there will be nobody to assign meanings to words. Like, no, you cannot say words will have meanings if no minds had ever existed.
Right. Exactly.
But I would say that in the abstract, one could define, for example, a book. One could define, say, assign a meaning to the book. Is a collection of pages, and that's it. That proposition, that word, that set of words, collection of pages, is the meaning of a book. That's it. The book has a meaning. The word book has a meaning. A set of pages. In the abstract, this will work, even if minds didn't exist. I mean, obviously, nobody will be around to assign it. But what I think is, like, in the abstract, this will still exist.
There you go. Nobody around to assign it. So you're saying that you can assign the meaning to something, but the very process of something assigning meaning to something, you're talking about a mental process. The immaterial natural world, governed by blind, unintelligent natural law, does not assign anything to anything. It doesn't assign meaning to anything. No, there's no meaning at all without some kind of a mind to assign. And as soon as you use the word assign, you're implying that there is a mind there that is doing the assigning.
Sure.
So what can assign meaning to a book if no mind existed in order to assign that meaning?
Yeah, I guess nobody can assign it, right?
Yeah, assignment is impossible without a mind.
Yeah, sure. You have agents.
So the proposition knowledge is impossible is absolutely self-defeating. It is logically self-defeating, because the idea that knowledge is impossible implies that certain knowledge exists in order for the proposition to even be meaningful. If there's nothing, if there's no comprehension of the proposition knowledge is impossible, then the proposition knowledge is impossible is meaningless. But we both assume, and we're operating on the basis that we know what the meaning of that proposition is. And as soon as we say we know what the meaning of that proposition is, we have knowledge. And if we have knowledge, then the proposition is automatically false.
Yeah, okay. But let me go back to my analogy. How would you respond? I'll be interested in how would you respond directly to my analogy. Some aliens come to the earth and they shoot rays that make humans brain dead. Now, the statement is humans don't have knowledge. So knowledge is impossible for humans because they became brain dead. But in the abstract, right? It is true. I mean, in that universe, that scenario, it is true. It is a true proposition that humans don't have knowledge, right? What would you say about that? Because I don't see, I think this is like at least a logically possible scenario. Like aliens come and erase the knowledge of humans, right? And what would you say about this? I mean, what would you think of this? Like, this shows that if this is a scenario, if it's possible, and aliens can make humans brain dead, that they don't not have knowledge. Now, what if life didn't exist, right? The knowledge is impossible. I think the proposition itself will be true because even nobody exists, so knowledge is impossible also. Or if all life was like brainless, you know what I mean? I don't. It seems like logically possible to me. It seems like a logically possible state of affairs that nobody has knowledge because we are all amoebas or plants or something. You know what I mean? So
Yeah,
that's what I'm saying.
yeah. The argument. So the argument is that human knowledge is impossible because knowledge is impossible, period. If knowledge is impossible, then human knowledge is impossible. And
Right.
so if we say human knowledge is not impossible, that doesn't, so here's the modus ponens logical conditional syllogism. If knowledge is possible, human knowledge is impossible. I'm sorry, let me go back. If knowledge is possible, human knowledge is impossible. It's possible.
Yeah.
Omar is sitting here. Phil, you need to get more sleep.
But that doesn't follow. What
If knowledge is
Get it wrong.
possible, human knowledge is possible. In other words, if it's possible for knowledge, if knowledge is possible at all, because it's possible for a mind to have knowledge, and human beings have minds, then human beings can have knowledge.
Okay,
But if you erase the knowledge of human beings, that doesn't have any bearing on whether or not knowledge is possible in the first place. Because in your analogy about aliens, those aliens had minds.
right.
And they have knowledge. And they have the knowledge that their ray is able to wipe out all the minds of human beings. Does that mean that? So that means that human knowledge is impossible, and the reason human knowledge is impossible because our minds have been wiped clean.
That's right.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
That doesn't touch the argument. It doesn't touch the proposition knowledge is impossible at all, because the reason that human beings can have knowledge is because we have minds.
Right.
And so the argument is not restricted to human knowledge. The argument is restricted to knowledge that any being with a mind can have. And so if you want to back up to the aliens,
Yeah.
you have to ask the question, can those aliens have knowledge? And if those aliens have knowledge, then are those aliens subject to natural law the same way that human beings are? So the problem exists for the aliens just like it exists for the human beings. So you're not solving the problem, you're just relocating it.
Okay. Okay, let me put it this way. Let me modify the analogy. The aliens come, they wipe up our minds. So humans don't have knowledge, right? Let's say they wipe all of minds. The minds are like, do you think, oh, that's a good question. Do you think fish have knowledge? Are all minds, can we say that all minds have knowledge? For example, fish or very, very simple minds. Can we say all of minds, because they are mind, they must have knowledge? Or do you accept that there are some minds that are simple and don't have knowledge? For example, a fish. Would you accept this?
No, fish don't have minds.
Oh,
Fish have
really?
brains. Fish have
Oh,
brains.
okay. Really? How about
There's a
bears? Dog? How about dogs?
dogs have brains.
Really?
They do not have minds.
Oh, okay, I see. So
Animals
you
have
think,
brains. Brains are about conditioning. They're not about knowledge.
okay,
Knowledge is something that a mind has. Knowledge is not something that a brain has.
okay, but I
A
think,
brain is a physical organ that is subject to the laws of physics and chemistry.
yeah,
And my argument from a theistic worldview is that man is made in the image of God, and that man has an impersonal nature as well, or has an immaterial nature as well as a material nature. And therefore, for a human being, we have a dual nature. We have a brain and we have a mind, and those are not the same thing. Now they are related. They relate to each other. They have a nature where they work together. Because if you mess up the chemicals of my brain, then you're going to affect the functioning of my mind. But that's because my brain can influence my mind. But my brain and my mind are not the same thing. So no, fish do not have minds. Fish do not have knowledge. Fish have simply have conditioning. They don't have knowledge because knowledge is justified true beliefs. A fish can't justify its beliefs. So a mind may be able to have a belief, but that belief is simply conditioning. And it simply reacts to conditioning based on whatever, it reacts to stimulus based on whatever conditioning it holds at the moment.
right, okay.
And not only that, but let me go a step further. Okay, it is impossible for aliens to wipe out the minds of a human being
Okay, okay. Why?
because
Because they're
a mind is an immaterial thing. It's an immaterial substance. It is not a material physical substance. And so an alien can point his ray gun at a human being, and he might be able to make his brain cease functioning. But an alien ray cannot erase a mind, because a mind is not a physical thing, is not a material thing that is subject to material, natural, physical laws. And so aliens can't wipe out human knowledge, because human knowledge is something that exists in an immaterial sense, not a material sense. All aliens could do is wipe out my brain. And that might have an effect on my mind, but it's not the same thing. It's not going to actually wipe out my mind. A mind is not a computer that holds data, that stores data like a computer stores data. That's not what a mind is. A mind is an immaterial thing, and the laws of logic can be worked out in that mind, and that is all a non-material and not a physical process.
okay. But would you agree aliens can erase some knowledge by modifying the brain, can erase some of the knowledge? For example, when there are accidents or diseases, when people get hurt and they have amnesia and they forget something, so some knowledge was erased. Would you think that aliens
No.
will do this theoretically? They couldn't erase knowledge.
No knowledge is erased. The only thing that's erased is the ability of the mind to access that knowledge. Knowledge cannot be erased. Only the access to knowledge can be erased. So you could argue that the brain gives us access to knowledge in our minds. And that if you somehow short circuit the brain, you might shut down the ability of the brain to access that knowledge. But that doesn't mean that you're shutting down or that you're erasing knowledge. No, we're getting off into a bunny trail here, and this doesn't have much to do with the existence of God, but you haven't shown that the proposition knowledge is impossible is not logically self-defeating. You haven't actually shown that yet.
Let me
So
okay, go ahead and finish off one, but I want to come in because I do actually think this discussion does have something to do with God, and I have some questions that'll bear that out. But go ahead, Juan, and get the final word if you were about to say something.
No, yeah, I wanted to say, like, okay, we look back, the original argument is trying to make, I think it's trying to make a bit of an internal critique. It's saying if naturalism is true, then determinists create our knowledge, right? Why? Because determinist causes, natural causes, cause our beliefs and our knowledge, right? Because
no.
Okay.
No. Natural law does not determine our knowledge. Natural law determines our beliefs.
Yeah, well, that's right. And then therefore our knowledge.
Knowledge, no. Knowledge is, the definition of knowledge is justified true belief. Okay? If naturalism is true, and what we're talking about is a worldview called atheism or non-theism, where there is no God, that the only thing that exists is natural law and the physical universe governed by natural law. That is a philosophical systematic known as naturalism.
Right.
If naturalism is true, natural law determines everything.
Yeah.
And natural law is deterministic. And what I mean by deterministic is scientific determinism. And again, we can go back to Stephen Hawking, and he articulated the concept of scientific determinism very, very effectively. Materialistic determinism. If naturalism is true, natural law determines everything. If natural law determines everything, then natural law determines everything about humanity. If natural law determines everything about humanity, then natural law determines all of our beliefs, because beliefs are part of what it means to be human, part of our human nature, part of our faculties as human beings. If natural law determines all of our beliefs, then none of our beliefs are arrived at through natural or through rational justification. I don't believe things because there's evidence for them. I don't believe things because I have arrived at them through some kind of rational thinking, some rational process, rational argument. I believe everything that I believe because natural law has determined that I believe it. Everything. Yeah. Everything that I believe. So there is no rational process involved in me arriving at my beliefs.
Right.
If that's the case, I have no idea whether any of my beliefs are true or false. Because I don't believe in them because they're true or false. I don't believe them because of evidence. I believe in them because I was determined by natural law to believe in them, and it could not have been otherwise. It's impossible for it to be otherwise. Natural law works the way it works. All the physics and chemistry in my brain, which is all there is in naturalism, and my beliefs are only something that physics and chemistry determine in my brain. If that's all my beliefs are, I have no idea whether those beliefs are true or false. Any of them. None of them. Every belief that I hold is unreliable because it was determined by natural law, not by rational processes and not by evidence. If that's the case, then none of my beliefs are reliable. If none of my beliefs are reliable because they were caused, if my beliefs are caused, they're not reliable. And if none of my beliefs are reliable, then there is no such thing as human knowledge. No such thing as knowledge at all for any being that has a brain and whose brain's beliefs are all determined by natural law. Then it's impossible for any being to have knowledge, because every being is governed by natural law, governed by deterministic natural law. If that's the case, knowledge is impossible.
Right. Sure. What I will say to that is that there is a false dichotomy between reasoning as a process and a physical or natural determinate process. I think reasoning could be a process that has been determined and is physical and still count as reasoning. It still was reasoning, even if my brain determined it to reason, but I reasoned, right? That's what I would see that this way. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. Determined rationality is a contradiction in terms. It's logically absurd. You cannot determine a mind or a brain or any thinking organ to reason.
Why not?
Reason cannot be caused. If reason is being caused, it's not reason. All it is a series of beliefs that are being caused. So if you think that reason can be caused, then what you're giving me is a self-defeating, incoherent idea, incoherent proposition. The very definition of reasoning is that I deliberate, I examine evidence, and I examine logical arguments, and I select what is true or false based on the evidence, whether it's analytical evidence or whether it's empirical evidence. So reasoning cannot be caused.
Right. Yeah, I think this is the definition. I deliberate and I examine. What I will say there is that I, the me, the self, in my worldview, it's also a physical thing. So there is no problem to say that, and it will also be determined, but it will also count as being the self, as being the I. So even if it's determined, it still counts. I am doing the reasoning. Like there is no distinction between the chemicals in my brain are me. No, I am the chemicals in my brain, in my worldview. And because there is no problem, then I am doing the determining, even if the deliberation, even if this is a determinate process.
But how do you know you're determining? How do you know that you are deliberating? If all of your beliefs are determined by natural law, then your belief that you're deliberating is determined by natural law. So how do you know you're deliberating when it is natural law that is determining you to believe that you are deliberating?
Well, at some point I would say I know that I'm deliberating by direct acquaintance of what it's like to deliberate. Like, for example, Descartes says, I think, therefore I am. He says, it's obvious that I think, right? The question, how do you know, if someone were to ask Descartes, okay, but how do you know that you're thinking? You will be like, no, that's a wrong question. It's obvious that I'm thinking. What I will call thinking to whatever it is that I'm doing, right? There's no justification beyond that. I just have direct acquaintance with what is to deliberate.
So what you're saying is it's turtles all the way down.
I think
I have an experience of deliberating, therefore I know I'm deliberating.
Yeah.
But what's causing the experience of deliberating? Natural law.
Yes, sure.
Yeah. All right.
And natural law is determining you to have the experience that you are deliberating.
Yeah.
But natural law is not a reliable source of knowledge, so natural law could be deceiving you into believing that you are experiencing, that you're deliberating, when that might not be true. You might not be deliberating, you just simply have the experience of deliberating, and that experience is caused by natural law. So it's you can push it back to experience, you can push it back to all sorts of different options that you might want to base it on, but every one of those options is determined by natural law under naturalism.
All right.
And so you can't solve the problem with experience. You can't solve the problem with the belief, your belief that you are deliberating. Because it could be obvious to you that you're deliberating, but it could be natural law that is making it obvious to you that you're deliberating, and natural law could be deceiving you. Because natural law is not aimed at truth. Natural law is only aimed at the results, the outcomes, cause and effect of physics and chemistry. That's all it is.
Okay, so I want to step in here because Omar has been very patient and he's had a good nap. It looks like he's
I
stretched.
did not sleep at all. I heard every word of it.
Excellent. So
Believe me, I
I
did.
had my own questions. I'm gonna
I mean, I could
forego.
recite the entire 2-hour conversation right now. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah,
Is that a false belief that you haven't been sleeping?
I have not.
it's
I heard
determined
every
either
word.
way.
Believe me.
But yeah, Omar, I want you to, as my co-host, to finally kind of take the reins and, first of all, before you probe each side, just what were your general thoughts on the debate since you've got it recorded there for the 2 hours? Yeah,
Yes. So my general thoughts on the debate are there are definitely things I agree with Phil on, and there are other things I agree with Juan on. I think what the premise, all three of Phil's arguments are actually based around one fundamental fact, and this we agree on, is that consciousness is an irreducible fundamental. You can't break consciousness down into pieces and parts. You can't build it out of pieces and parts. It is a thing in itself. Okay, it's irreducible. Now, Juan, how do we prove that to you? So you were back on section 2 when we were talking about personhood, and you're talking about, well, could you build a machine sometime in the future or through some mechanistic process that's conscious? And Phil was trying to explain that it requires a creator, and a creator is inherently what he meant to say. What he was implying to say was that creator is inherently conscious. It has that property, and so you can't create it out of nothing. You can't create a creator out of nothing. Now, another way of approaching that question for you is actually you were dancing around it yourself in response to the third part. Okay, when you were talking about the difference between a proposition and knowing a proposition. So, and you were saying that there's a distinct difference, and that's actually correct. So this is an argument that actually Roger Penrose uses. Is very interesting. Is if you take a computer, okay, he ties this in with Gödel's theorem. If you take a computer and you write down a sequence of logical propositions. If A, therefore B, B, therefore A, you make a series of propositions. A computer or any kind of machine or mechanism can be programmed to spit those propositions out in the proper order and produce a true statement from premises, but it will never understand that that's what it's doing, because consciousness is always a metacognitive process. So it is impossible for a mechanism or a machine of any kind to have consciousness, because consciousness is always one step removed and outside of the process that's being observed. Okay, so you could write code to create consciousness, but how would you know what that code is? So consciousness is metacognitive. You're always outside of the train of logic, whether it's a series of logical propositions, whether it's math, whether it's computer programming or computer language. These are all logical processes that are being apprehended as being true. If I have a computer write 1 + 1 = 2 all over the screen, it is a true statement, but the computer does not understand that statement. Right? That's a meta process. You're always outside of it. That's why consciousness is fundamental and irreducible, and you cannot produce it from any mechanistic means that we know of. Okay.
Right.
Now, So that's where I wanted to clarify that with you.
Yeah.
Now,
Go ahead and
Phil,
ask your
ask you
questions.
a question.
Yeah. So
Yeah, well, with Juan, I just want him to consider and think about the points that Phil made about consciousness, about agency, because all three of his arguments, moral, personhood, and knowledge, are all grounded in the fact of consciousness as being a reality and an irreducible thing. Because your personhood is grounded in consciousness, your sense of morality is an aesthetic. Okay, you're talking about moral obligation, you're talking about, what makes something immoral, and you're saying that, well, evil is if I hurt something unnecessarily. Okay, and even Dale brought up the example of a rock hitting someone in the head and killing them. Is that evil? Well, I will contend that that person who gets hit in the head would find it very evil that the rock hit him in the head. But an objective outsider is going to say, it's just what happens. Okay, but evil and good and evil, they're predicated on our own aesthetic. And our aesthetic is based on our own consciousness. It's an aesthetic thing. Okay, you can't legislate evil with a list of acts and say, doing this is evil, doing that is evil, because someone can always come by and find a counterexample where the very same thing is not evil, right? Even in the Bible, if you want to use a Christian perspective, there's this incident in the Old Testament where the Jews are commanded to go in and wipe out an entire race full of people, all the way down to the animals. Kill the dogs, kill the cats, kill the babies, kill everyone. So is killing babies moral or immoral? Is it evil or not evil? Well, they'll say that it's contextually driven. And if God determines that in this instance it's not evil, then it's not evil. So evil and good are not an objective list of things, but a conscious interpretation and an aesthetic based on our own nature. I really liked, Phil, your comment that evil is going against God's nature, or something to that effect. You said something that defies God's nature, because that nature of being a pure conscious being is what we are imbued with. Okay, now I can't make an absolute statement for myself that I know with certainty that there's a God. Okay, but I can say that I think it's a reasonable proposition based on the fact that I have consciousness which is irreducible and a thing in itself. And where the hell did that come from? It didn't come from mechanistic processes. So that's something for you to start contemplating as well. Then what is an aesthetic? Evil is not defined by the externalization. It's defined by the internal aesthetic of opposing your own nature. You know when you're doing something wrong to someone. You feel it in your gut, in your heart, in your mind. You feel it. That's because it's counter-resonating against the nature of your own consciousness, which is to be pure and good, okay, fundamentally. And when you contradict that nature, you're contradicting your own nature and hypothetically God's nature. And that creates that feeling of dissonance that we call evil.
So
and you're not going to get that out of a mechanistic process.
Do you have a question for Juan on that?
Oh, for one, no, no. Would you, but do you have a response to my proposition?
Sure, that's very interesting. What I would say, so consciousness is something that is fundamentally irreducible, right? You say.
Yeah.
But what about, how do you make up of the fact that we could say that dogs have some kind of reduced consciousness?
I agree. Dogs are conscious. I don't agree with the proposition that animals aren't conscious. I believe they're conscious.
But the conscious is reduced.
No.
Doesn't this mean that it has been reduced?
Right.
Okay, let's listen to what Juan has to say.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I understand what he means.
Like, for example, you say consciousness cannot be reduced, right? But I
Right.
think that dogs have a consciousness that compared to ours is reduced. And
Well, that's
fish,
not what I mean by reduction.
okay,
That's
okay.
not what I mean. I mean atomistic reduction, where you take something apart and break
Okay.
it into
Yes,
pieces.
yes, yes. I agree with that.
Not
Yes, yes, yes.
quantity like this, but
Yeah, that's
actually
right. That's
breaking
right.
it
That's
apart.
right. But
Yeah.
that's what I would say. If consciousness has a degree that there is a range of consciousness among living beings, it seems like this is more, it's like easier to explain this under the theory that consciousness arises from natural process in the brain, and it's more difficult to explain from the theory that you need a soul, for example, to be conscious. Because if you need a soul to be conscious, then you have to postulate that dogs have souls and fish have souls. And where do you stop? Bugs have souls. Do amoebas or bacteria or viruses? At some point, it's kind of weird.
It's a good question. It's a good question. I don't have a specific answer for that, but I do believe that consciousness cannot be created from an amalgamation of parts for the reason I already outlined. With you just try to look at it this way. Okay, let's say I took you know what an erector set is? It's an old thing. That's old people know. All right. It's toys that we kids used to have with sticks and balls and wheels and things you can build. Okay. Imagine I got the biggest erector set in the world and I built a 1-for-1 scale model of a human brain out of wood pieces. Okay. So I simulated every neuron, every chemical, every synapse, and I just remapped all of that with cogs and wheels and sticks and axles. Okay. I would have to make it about the size of the entire United States. Okay. To remap the whole brain like that. But let's say I built that thing and then I hit a switch and I made it start running. Do you really imagine that that would suddenly become conscious?
Yeah. I know what
So,
you.
there you go.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. That's right. Yeah.
There you go.
All right, cool. So, all right, yeah, thank you for that, Omar. And I'll just ask a couple of my own questions, one for each of you. So, yeah, I have just a couple questions for my own, and then I'll let each of you give kind of a closing statement. But okay, so first question is for you, Phil, kind of thing. So, it's on the question of knowledge, right? And you gave the definition of justified true belief as knowledge and how it's sort of cannibalistic. If you have a deterministic system producing our beliefs, you can't be justified. I just wanted to ask you, what about other philosophers like Alvin Plantinga, who have, a different definition of knowledge, one that's a reliablest one. It relies on the faculties themselves that we have.
Right.
So in that case, you don't really need to be consciously aware that you know. As long as the proper faculties are working, then you've got knowledge, whether it's determined or not. What would you respond to something like that?
Well, my response to that would be extremely long and extremely complicated. I deal with Alvin Plantinga's warranted true belief from his book. I'm trying to think of the name of the book. I think it is the book. The book might be Warranted True Belief or something like that.
He's got a trilogy.
But he articulates an argument that he calls proper warrant and properly basic beliefs, and that there are certain conditions that there is a reliable mechanism that is aimed at truth, and that so. And I don't remember what I think there were three main ingredients to his warrant, his idea of warranted belief, and so my response to Alvin Plantinga in particular is that every single one of his criteria for knowledge, for his concept of warranted true belief, has to rely on some kind of rational justification. And I could go to the material that I've written on this, and I could appeal to it, and I could give you more details, but he comes up with the conditions that are necessary for warranted belief. whether a belief is warranted or not. And my treatment of that argument is that every one of the conditions that he has come up with for warranted belief has to be rationally justified, because it can't be justified on warrant, because that would be hopelessly circular. So he can't defend his idea of warrant on the basis of warrant. He has to defend his idea of warrant on the basis of rational justification. And my broader conclusion to all of that, if you were to read what I write on this subject matter, is that any theory of knowledge apart from rational justification has to be rationally justified. So, in other words, no theory of knowledge can justify itself except rational justification, because rational justification is the very nature of justification. So rational justification can justify itself. And that's why the definition of knowledge is justified true belief. And when we say justified true belief, we're talking about rationally justified true belief.
All right.
So that's kind of my treatment of Plant. And there's a whole other family of arguments coming from other philosophers besides, Van Inwagen and people like that. And all of those actually fall into the same category, that they are theories of knowledge that are apart from and distinct from rational justification, but each one of those theories has to be rationally justified, because no theory of knowledge can justify itself unless it is rationally justified, which means that rational justification is the core theory of knowledge, and it's the only one that's actually ultimately reliable.
Awesome. Yeah, I did have a follow-up, but I'm not going to ask that for now. But I am curious.
Did I scare you away?
No.
I
want to be
understanding. Can you define rational justification?
Rational justification.
I know what I think it means, but I want to know what it means in the technical sense you're using.
But no debating.
No. I just want to understand.
Yeah, I would. It's difficult to give you a synopsis, to give you a summary of what rational justification is, but I would, the way that I would take a stab at it would be that rational justification is where you rely on reason in order to arrive at a conclusion. And if reason supports the conclusion that you're after, then you can have proper knowledge that that conclusion is actually true. Right. And I wouldn't go into any more detail than that, because it would be another bunny trail, but.
All right. So Juan, I just want to ask you, so you kind of mentioned something very interesting coming from an atheistic materialist aspect. I think it was with respect to, knowledge and stuff and propositions you guys were debating. And you kind of admitted, well, look, propositions exist in an abstract realm. And I just wanted to get from you, like, what does that mean on an atheistic materialist worldview? Because I can understand as a Christian, I might go, look, without any human beings, propositions exist in the mind of God. That's kind of the universal grounding for all these things.
Right.
But on atheism, what does it mean for a proposition to exist in an abstract realm?
No, I don't think it exists in an abstract realm. I don't think that. I think that they are abstract in nature. In fact, I say that I use that wording just for the sake of the argument, but I'm still considering this. Maybe I will go a nominalist route, and I will say propositions do not exist in a strict way of defining the word exist in a strict way. I'm still considering reading about this. Maybe I want to read like about nominalized stuff like that. So I'm not sure actually, but I would say that proposition, that abstract things, they don't need a place to exist. They don't need a realm, because they are abstract and not physical. They don't need to exist anywhere. They just exist, right? The question, where do they exist? Here, or in this real, or in this real, it makes no sense. There is nowhere, because they don't need space or a place. That's what I would say.
Okay, yeah, thanks for your clarifying. It sounded to me in the debate that you were kind of taking a realist stance. That's what. Thanks for clarifying. You do take an
Okay.
anti-realist, a not nominalism position. So,
Nominalism, yeah,
okay.
maybe.
Yeah, I wanted to yell out Neoplatonist when he said that. When
Yeah.
he said that.
Awesome. All right. Good. So that does it for the questions. And I'll give each of you guys a 5 minute or less closing statement, whatever you guys want to say. Starting we started with Phil. So yeah, Phil, go ahead and give a closing statement to wrap up the debate.
Okay, let me go read the one that I prepared. No, I didn't. I didn't actually prepare a closing statement. My closing statement would be my opening statement. Um, I I don't believe that Juan has refuted any of my arguments. I believe that those arguments are valid and sound, and I haven't heard him demonstrate that they are logically invalid and that they are not sound. So if that's the case, then I think that the arguments should stand until they can be demonstrated to be rationally unsound and rationally fallacious. There's that. I think that also my understanding was that Juan was going to approach this debate mainly from the argument from evil, and and I heard him articulate the argument from evil in a way that is true and that is clear, and that represents the argument from evil that I have seen in the literature over the years. I studied philosophy at the University of Iowa, and I studied the argument from evil that goes all the way back to the ancient Greeks. And so Epicurus was really the kind of considered the founder of the argument from evil, and I deal with that on the basis of the Epicurean dilemma in my book Machines Don't Laugh, and so if that was kind of Juan's main emphasis in the debate, then I think it's fair for me to address it, and the way that I addressed it is to show that if God does not exist, then evil has no objective reality. And therefore, the argument from evil actually does not indicate that God does not exist. It points to the existence of God, because if you have an argument, and I've summarized the Epicurean dilemma by saying if God exists, evil would not exist. Evil exists, therefore God does not exist. That is kind of the simplest formulation of the Epicurean dilemma. Now, the first premise is more complicated than that, but that it can be reduced to that first premise, the way that I just articulated it. But the conclusion that God does not exist circles back and it destroys premise two, that evil would not exist, or that evil exists and therefore God does not exist. So if God does not exist, then evil does not exist. And premise two of the Epicurean argument is that evil does exist. So the Epicurean dilemma, the argument from evil, is self-defeating. And then I would also just quickly review the idea that this is an internal critique, and that therefore my objection to the argument of evil from a purely a priori standpoint it fails as an objection, because it's not an a priori argument. It's supposedly just an internal critique of theism, and my objection to that is that you can't stand on it as an internal critique, because Epicurus never stood on it as an internal critique of theism. Epicurus treated it as though it was an external critique and not an internal critique. And so if God does not exist, then I still maintain that evil does not exist as an objective reality. And the idea that evil is an objective reality is fundamental to the success of the argument from evil. And that's why I believe that it actually points to the existence of God instead of to the non-existence of God. And then I would also just recapitulate that I believe that the absence of knowledge for any mind is actually a complete defeater for the atheistic worldview, atheism and naturalism. And because the idea that knowledge is impossible is an absolutely self-contradictory, self-defeating proposition. And self-defeating propositions are automatically false. And I think that we can establish that if naturalism is true, knowledge is impossible. And if that's the case, and knowledge is impossible is self-defeating and therefore false, then naturalism is automatically false. But if God does not exist, naturalism is true. If naturalism is false, it follows that God exists.
All right, thank you so much. So, Juan, over to you to give the final closing round in 5 minutes or less, whatever you want to say to wrap things up.
Yeah, okay. First of all, I want to thank Phil for this debate and also Dale for inviting me. I think it was very interesting. So yeah, I think mostly the topic was responding to these three arguments, and also we had some discussion about the problem of suffering and even the problem of animal suffering, as Omar brought it up. So very quickly, what I would say of the first argument, the argument from evil, from the existence of evil. This sounds like the moral argument. Looking back, I think I wish I could have responded better to it. I think a better response. What I usually try to respond to the moral argument, I go into the Euthyphro dilemma. And I don't want to bring up here new stuff because then Phil may want to respond to that. That's what I usually do to try to respond to the moral argument, to show that there is also an issue with saying that objective evil, right? But that's not my idea. I try to do something else. But I think the Euthyphro dilemma response is better. But I don't want to bring up like new stuff here, right? I try to say that I try to come up with an objective definition of evil, to say that evil is just harming somebody for no good reason. And Phil pointed out something that is true, is that what is a good reason, that there is subjectivity, there is not an objective. So because I'm trying to come up with an objective definition, but how do I objectively prove that something is a good reason? I think there is maybe an issue here in my definition. So yeah, I can grant that, right? But another thing is but I think there was one issue where Phil says, okay, evil is going against the nature of God, right? I think there's an obvious issue here, is that the atheist is not going to agree with that definition, right? So I think we should start from we should first. We are not going anywhere if I have a definition now he doesn't agree with that. But I also don't see any reasons to agree with his definition until you first prove that God exists, and then we can define evil like that. That's okay, I saw some issues there. Okay, the second argument, about humans not being able to, right? Yeah, I think a lot of it will go back to evolution, where evolution can create machines that are have this property of being conscious, of being able to laugh, of have complex biological activities, whether this is possible or not. And I think we'll go into a different topic, right? So I would say I would just have to postulate that could be possible in principle, right? But maybe, we have to look at other things. And the third argument, the one about knowledge, this one is a complicated thing. When you start, the tag argument is a bit this is very complicated. It's very philosophical and depends on what the definitions, and you have to be very exact with definitions. I still think that the proposition for humans, knowledge is impossible. It's perfectly logical, because I came up with a scenario that aliens came to Earth and erased our mind, our brains. He says that minds cannot be erased, but okay, that's another thing. And they erase our brains, right? So humans don't have knowledge. For me, this sounds like a perfectly possible. At least there is no logical impossibility in that scenario. Now, there are two things he says. I don't want to bring up new arguments, but one is that aliens will have knowledge in this scenario, and the other one is that aliens cannot erase our minds because they're immaterial. Okay. The second thing is that this begs the question, I think, because I wouldn't agree that mind is immaterial, right? So I will disagree with that. And the first thing is that, okay, what if the alien ship explodes right after it erases our minds, and the aliens die as well, and all is left in this scenario, this hypothetical scenario, is humans with their brains erased who don't have knowledge, right? So I think this scenario is still like logically possible, and because it's logically possible, I would say, okay, then it's logically possible that humans to have knowledge, even if there was nobody around to know this proposition. A proposition can still be true, and that takes us to other issue. Okay, can proposition exist without a mind? That's another thing, maybe, and that's a whole different issue. Propositions, someone would say, no, that's not possible because propositions even need a mind to even exist, right? But there is a difference between a proposition is true in this world and the proposition itself exists, right? This is very complicated, and at some point, yeah, I think very interesting, but at some point, it risks getting into just word games. I think that's the problem with the tag argument. Okay, and one last thing about the problem of the animal suffering. I don't want to bring up new things, but I think what Omar said is it illustrates. I also disagree that animals don't have like feelings. I think if someone is like kicking a dog, it doesn't have to be in front of my property. If I see someone like kicking a dog, well, I think everyone will be like, hey, stop it, because you don't think that the dog is an autonomous, you understand that the dog has feelings and this is wrong, right? And what Phil says is, okay, I would have an issue because he's destroying God's creations. Okay, but Phil, would you react the same? I mean, if I was destroying a flower, I think it's very different because the dog has feelings and the flower not. So the flower is also destroying God's creation, but you can do with the flower whatever you want because it has no feelings. So it's not just destroying God's creation; it's the fact you're making a conscious being feel pain. So that's what I would say. I don't know. Yeah, if maybe you can respond to that. But I don't mean, yeah. So otherwise, it was a great debate. Thank you. And that's all. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Juan. I appreciate that. So, yeah, I just want to say thank you so much to Phil and Juan for doing this debate. And it was a great, cordial, and respectful conversation. Thank you to Omar for being my co-host and kind of sitting through most of that and stuff like that. So, yeah, I hope you guys are more or less happy with how everything turned out. And yeah.
Yep. Can I make a couple comments here,
Sure.
Dale? First of all, Juan, thank you so much for doing this. And the second comment that I have is, Juan, you are very respectful and you're open-minded. You listen very well. And I was impressed by how well you listened, and you took my remarks into consideration. And I was impressed by how you listened and considered what I had to say. And I hope that I listened and considered what you had to say as well as you did. I'm not sure I did. I think
true.
you may have done a better job of listening and considering than I did. And if that's the case, then I learned something today, and that is that I have some room for improvement in my debating strategies and in my how I conduct myself in a debate. I would like to conduct myself in a debate more like you do. And so if
I didn't feel I wasn't listening, right? I think it was great. I think it was a great debate. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, and I do too. And I just really wanted to extend my appreciation to how you conducted yourself in this debate. I was very impressed, and I think you're a good debater, and I think that you are articulate, and so I just all I want to do is just thank you and just express my appreciation to how well you conducted yourself. If I wanted to debate anybody, if I wanted someone on my debating team, you would be the kind of person that I would like to have on my debating team.
Thanks.
So thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Articulate and thoughtful, both of you.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So yeah, I appreciate all that.
You responded to what he said directly without, you were responding to him. You were listening to him, and he to you also. You guys really had a good interaction.
Good chemistry. Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody. And later this week, I will be posting up my interviews with Alan Rule on Jewish objections to Jesus. as well as Dr. Cheryl White on her brand new book on the Shroud of Turin. So tune in for that. But otherwise, take care, everybody.